Hey there guys, I am the Six Machine and welcome back to another Warhammer video. We are back with the Assassins again, and as voted most popular by you, as well as being the Assassin which is getting the brand spanking new model with the Warhammer Plus subscription service they showed off the other day, the next one we are going to cover is the Master Sniper, the Vindicare Assassin. So, like before, we will be covering his datasheet, his special rules, abilities, and his weapons, and then coming to a decision about whether he is worth that 100 point price tag that comes along with him. And for those 100 points, you get the generic assassin stat line of movement 7, weapon and ballistic skill 2+, strength and toughness 4, 5 wounds, 5 attacks, leadership 9, and that 6-up save. Obviously, being ballistic skill 2+ is handy on a guy that's going to be sniping at people all game, but the rest isn't bad, and with 5 attacks hitting on 2s, even though he has no dedicated melee weapon, between that and his pistol, which he can fire in close combat in your shooting phase, he can fend off small harassing units which may drop in near him and try to tie him up. He won't be fighting his way through marines or anything like that, but a few guardsmen or gaunts, he can probably fend them off reasonably well. Like the Calidus, he has the Agent of the Imperium keyword, which is basically how you include the assassin models in your army. It lets you include one Agent of the Imperium unit in each Imperium patrol, battalion, or brigade detachment without taking up a slot. And a really useful part of this rule is that, unlike if you add other armies or models from other factions to your list, this doesn't break up detachment abilities like chapter tactics or combat doctrines, so you absolutely can bring assassins in your Space Marines or Astra Militarum or Custodes lists and not feel like you are putting yourself at a disadvantage by losing some of your key detachment abilities. He, again, like the Calidus, also has the Execution Force rule, which allows you to bring up to 4 assassins in a single Vanguard detachment, even if it doesn't have an HQ. So if you do want to bring the lot of them to a game, you can add them to your list relatively easily, and they don't come with any additional costs, just the 400 points you will need to pay for the units themselves, but no command points lost or other special rules being impacted, which is obviously a very welcome rule and helps to somewhat incentivize you to bring them in Imperium forces. Independent Operative is the final rule shared by all of the assassins and essentially means that they can never have a warlord trait, which is kinda neither here nor there, to be honest, and it also allows them to be set up in concealment and then arrive on the board 9 inches away from the enemy at the end of your movement phase from turn 2 onwards. Now, whilst this could be useful for some of the assassins, it isn't so much for the Vindicare in my opinion. You should likely know where he's going to go, and it should almost always be very, very far away from your enemy's army, so you're unlikely to ever really need to make use of the Independent Operative little trick. Although I suppose if your opponent is being sneaky and you know he's going to try and deploy his main characters or his warlord as far away from your Vindicare as possible, it's potentially a trick you could make use of to make sure that the Vindicare does come onto the board and can get a clear shot at a tasty company commander or Drukhari Archon or something like that. But past the combined assassin rules, the Vindicare, as you would expect, has a lot of unique rules which help him to target and kill your enemies from a distance. First up in this regard is the Deadshot ability, which allows you to ignore the Lookout Sir rule for the purposes of targeting characters, meaning it is even more difficult for your opponent to keep their juicy HQs away from the Vindicare's prying eyes. And then it also lets you, on the roll of a 6 to wound with his rifle or his pistol, to change the damage of the weapon to D6 for that attack, which is obviously a very nice little bonus. It does mean that his weapon can do 6 damage in one hit potentially, but as we will see, this is part of a few big issues which the Vindicare has, And that is essentially that on a model that has one super strong attack, you really do want as a little randomization as possible. You absolutely need that reliability and that consistency when you're dealing with one-shot guns. And this d6 damage is just super swingy. There's nothing more annoying than getting that hit through, then getting the wound through, getting past any saves they may have, and then just rolling a 1 for your damage. It just feels really disappointing. The Vindicare also has the faultless aim special rule, which means that as long as he hasn't moved, he will be hitting on 2s. This is pretty decent and lets you ignore things like psychic powers or anything that has a -1 to hit from fly or other special abilities that may put a -1 to hit penalty on you. It's obviously not as powerful as it was in 8th, as the negative to hit penalties always do cap out at -1, so it's not like you could be ignoring a potential -3 or -4 to your hit rolls anymore. But again, it does at least mean that 99% of the time you will get to use your ballistic skill of 2+, which, like we just mentioned, does help with his reliability, putting him at a pretty good 83% chance of hitting his targets. Headshot is the next of his bespoke abilities, and you can really tell with the naming of his rules that he's got a definite focus on shooting people and also people's heads. This is a really quite cool little rule that is still somewhat swingy and random in itself, but in my opinion does actually help to somewhat smooth out the Vindicare's damage output and counterbalance the random nature of his weapon's damage. What it does is that after you've caused a wound on an enemy model but they weren't killed, you roll a d6 and on a 3+, they suffer a mortal wound. Then, if that doesn't kill them, you roll again, and on a 4+, they suffer another mortal wound, and you keep going, adding 1 to the required result until you fail the roll. And what this means in practice is that you could, if you made all of your rolls, get an extra 4 mortal wounds onto the target. So if you did roll that measly 1 for your damage dice, this can help you to just bump that up to a more acceptable number of wounds. And conversely, it can also spike your damage up to a good chunk more if you're lucky. Say you did roll a 6th wound and got that d6 damage, and then you rolled a 6 for that. Against a model like Guilliman, for example, you could then potentially roll your 3+, your 4+, and then your 5+, and then take him out in a single shot. Like I always say, it's very unlikely to happen, but still, it is technically possible. If it was me though, I would always consider this just a nice little buffer to help you counteract the abysmal damage rolls of 1 or 2, rather than hoping for a full 10 points of damage from one rifle shot, but it does have the potential to get you up to a really large amount of wounds done on a target. His final ability that specifically helps his ranged damage output is his Spy Mask, which quite simply states that when you're making an attack with a ranged weapon with the Vindicare, the target doesn't get the benefit of cover. And going into 9th, most ignore cover rules changed to ignoring light cover, for instance, but in the latest FAQs there have been no changes to this ability, so as far as I understand it, this ignores cover benefits of not just light cover, which is giving that extra armor save, but also I think dense cover as well, so they don't get that extra -1 to be hit. I mean, it's not like it would make a huge difference anyway, because in most cases, due to the Vindicare's faultless aim rule, he will be hitting on 2s. But yeah, it effectively means that your targets in cover won't be getting that extra +1 to their armor save, which really does help the Vindicare to get his wounds through. The Vindicare also has the lightning reflexes rule like the other assassins, giving him that tasty 4-up invulnerable save and relegating his 6-up armor to absolute uselessness. It does do a decent job of keeping him alive with his 5 wounds, but it's helped even further by his stealth suit, which gives enemy units targeting him with ranged weapons a -1 to hit. And if he's in or on a terrain feature, which let's be honest, as a sniper he should pretty much be 99% of the time, this gets buffed to a -2 to hit. Now, as we mentioned before, the fact that penalties only go to a maximum of -1 now does make this slightly less of a good ability, as you will only ever knock a Marine, for example, to hitting on 4s instead of 3s, but it can have some niche benefits against certain abilities and armies. Say you have Dark Angels shooting at you, for instance, and they've stood still, so they're getting that +1 to hit from Grim Resolve. And then if they have some other bonus to hit from, I don't know, a psychic power or something, they will still be hitting him on 3s instead of 2s in that situation, whilst against a regular -1 to hit ability, they would still get the ability to hit on 2s and effectively overwrite that original -1. So it can have its uses, it's just not as fantastic as it was back in 8th edition. Still, it does give your Vindicare a 5 wound, 4 up invulnerable, with a -1 to hit profile for enemies to get through in order to kill him, which isn't mind-blowingly good in any way, but it does make him a tiny bit sturdier than your opponent might expect. Onto his instruments of death now. The Vindicare, as you can tell by the model, carries a big fucking sniper rifle as his main armament, so we will cover that first because, let's be honest, that's probably the weapon you will be using 99% of the time. The Exitus rifle has a mind-blowing 72-inch range with a heavy 1, strength 5, -3 AP, D3 damage profile, and comes with the special ability that not only does it always wound infantry on a 2+, but also enemy units cannot take invulnerable saves against it, which means, as you would expect, this guy can really do a number on enemy HQs and characters who quite often either find their protection by not being targetable thanks to Lookout Sir, which the Vindicare ignores, or by having good armor and invulnerable saves, both of which are very much countered in his ignoring invulnerable saves from the gun. It's, in theory, a really quite solid gun profile. He's always hitting on 2s, always wounding infantry on 2s, ignoring most saves, and then doing D3 or D6 damage, and those extra mortal wounds if you fail to kill your target, which sounds pretty juicy, right? But the big problem is, even hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s only gives you a 69% chance to actually get a wound through, and then sure, he ignores invulnerable saves, but at -3 AP, even a 3-up armor save character will still get that 6-up save to try and, save against that hit. So at the end of the day, your Vindicare with his one shot has a roughly 57% chance of actually getting a wound through on an enemy, and then having to roll for damage just makes it so unreliable, really unreliable. Paying 100 points for a character that has a one-shot weapon and only just above a 50-50 chance of actually doing anything with his shots is honestly just not worth it. And it's a shame, because that really is his whole gimmick, and the fact that he can't even do that with a great deal of reliability really does make it hard to consider taking him in your lists. He does also come with the Exitus pistol, which is similar in that it ignores invuns and always wounds infantry on a 2+, but drops a huge amount of range and also a point of strength coming in at strength 4. As I said, it's nice if he does get into combat with anything, as you can shoot them in your shooting phase and pretty confidently kill an extra enemy model before hopefully your 5 attacks can at least cause them to fail a morale test and run away. And if you need to move the Vindicare, it may be worth using the pistol against a close by target to avoid taking that -1 to hit penalty if you try to shoot with the rifle, which is a heavy weapon. And then finally, he also has his blind grenades, which, whilst you will almost never use normally, are actually pretty solid if you end up getting charged. Overwatching with these gives you D6 shots, and if any of them hit, then the enemy doesn't take any damage, but does suffer a -1 penalty to hit rolls until the end of the turn. So if your enemy is trying to kill your Vindicare in combat, this can make it a little bit harder for them to hit your precious sniper. Overall, his weapons seem good, but they just don't quite match up to how the Vindicare realistically should be. I'd quite like something along the lines of the Mortal Wound headshot ability to go off on a successful hit roll to show that if he hits, he will at least do some damage as the bullet slams into his target. Even if you fail the subsequent wound roll, the fact that he has hit you still does some damage. Even if it was a slightly nerfed version of the ability, maybe just an automatic 1 or D3 mortal wounds on a hit instead of the rolling mechanic. And I would also love the rifle to go from D3 or D6 damage to perhaps just a flat 2, and then if you rolled a 6 to wound, maybe going up to a flat 4 damage, just to keep that consistency in his profile much more than it is right now. I don't know, there's a few things that I think would just make him and his one shot much less swingy and random, which is exactly how a precision expert sniper like the Vindicare should be in my mind. Like the other assassins, there are 2 unique assassin stratagems, and then the Vindicare has his own 2 bespoke ones as well. The priority threat neutralized grants you a free command point when you kill a character, or 2 if it's the enemy warlord, which seems tailor-made for the Vindicare, but again, he does actually struggle to kill characters. It might be more useful if you're up against Eldar or Astra Militarum with their squishier characters with less wounds, but against a 6 or 7 wound Marine HQ, it's just gonna take him honestly quite a long time to actually get through their pool of wounds to get that kill. And then alongside this, there is also Shadow Assignment, which essentially lets you swap out one assassin for another before the game starts, which can be really useful if you find yourself up against a certain army or certain list and feel that instead of the Vindicare, the more melee focused Eversaw may be a better fit, or against a psychic heavy army, maybe you want a Colexis to help counterbalance all of their psychic attacks. It is a very unique and malleable stratagem which can really help your lists to pick up the slack in one particular area, or really allow you to punish an enemy if they have a particular weakness that you think a specific assassin could take advantage of. And then in terms of his own unique stratagems for the Vindicare, the first is the double kill stratagem, which for 1 CP lets you basically fire again in your shooting phase. It must be at a different target, which is a bit of a shame, as you may end up just wounding 2 targets instead of definitely killing 1. But if you really did spike your dice and rolled really well, you could potentially kill 2 key characters in the enemy's list in a single shooting phase, which could really disrupt their battle plans. Killing something, for example, like a Space Marine Apothecary and an Ancient would massively decrease the effectiveness of something like a Dark Angels Azrael and Hellblaster Death Star, or taking out a Company Commander and Commissar or a Priest model could be a fantastic way to make sure that a load more infantrymen ran away after the rest of your army had finished shooting against the Astra Militarum. I think overall, for 1 CP, it's pretty much an auto usability most of the time, pretty much flat out doubling the damage output of the Vindicare every single turn really does help to turn his downside of just having that single shot into one that you can make much more use out of. It means that you can much more reliably make sure that your 2+ to hit and 2+ to wound aren't wasted and messed up just by some unfortunate dice rolling and some unfortunate ones. So overall, it's a pretty good stratagem for him, I think. I just wish it didn't have the limitation of requiring a different target. But still, at the end of the day, yeah, I would probably save a CP for this if you bring a Vindicare most turns to try and get through as many enemy characters as you possibly can. His second stratagem is the Turbo Penetrator round, which, as you might guess from the name of it, kind of supercharges his shot, and if you target an enemy vehicle or monster, when you score a hit, it does an automatic D3 mortal wounds and the attack sequence ends. As you'll remember, the 2+ to wound is only on infantry, so this does mean that against those nasty toughness 7 or toughness 8 vehicles and monsters, you don't have to worry about wounding on 5s. You can just use this stratagem and have a pretty solid chance of just doing an automatic D3 wounds to it. I do like this stratagem, I just think that it's a shame that it is a stratagem at all, because this used to be an ability that the Vindicare used to have just baked into his skills. He used to be able to choose from a variety of shots which did different things, and some were good against infantry, some were better against vehicles and monsters and that kind of thing. And I think, if I'm being honest, just having this rule baked into his profile and being able to choose what kind of shot he wanted to fire, you know, maybe the one that you could choose one where he did the 2+ to wound infantry and the possible extra mortal wounds with his headshot ability, which would be good against infantry and characters, or you could choose to fire this one if you were targeting a monster and just try and get those flat D3 mortal wounds, and then maybe some other one for larger squads. Instead of having to fall back on this as a stratagem, it just seems like a shame that you have to spend a command point to use this, when in my mind it should just be an option when you fire him to choose what kind of shot you're going to use. But that is it for the Vindicare. As I've said throughout this, he just doesn't quite live up to how you want him to perform or how you imagine him performing, you know, based on the fact that he's a master sniper. Having 2+ to hit and 2+ to wound makes it sound like you should always be getting through some damage on your enemies, but unfortunately the pure granularity of a d6 dice rolling game means that that isn't always the case, and the Vindicare, out of all the assassins, I think definitely suffers the most because of that, especially because he only has the one super powered shot. Even hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s still does massively decrease the chance that he's actually going to get any damage through by having just one shot. His double kill stratagem does alleviate that somewhat, but at 100 points, he can realistically get maybe 2 or 3 wounds down on a character a turn by using that stratagem, which means that over the course of a game, he will need to spend a good 4 or 5 command points from your pool to take out a character or 2, and if your opponent has a way to heal them up, then he might not even make a single kill throughout the entire game. And it's a shame because he looks cool. He really does look cool. I love the Vindicare model, and everyone loves the idea of this sniper just one-shotting enemy characters. But realistically, most armies have better ways to do that. And even other sniper units like eliminators or scout snipers can probably get you an equal amount of damage across the course of a game, and are both cheaper and arguably more survivable as they're doing it. I think just in general, he is very much a one-trick pony, but he doesn't quite have the damage output for that trick, and he doesn't have any other sort of utility abilities that make him worth taking, like the Calidus has with her Reign of Confusion, or that the Eversur or the Calexis also have in terms of what they can do outside of causing damage. The Vindicare just has his damage, his anti-character damage, and he just doesn't do enough to warrant a 100-point investment. But what do you think of the Vindicare? Do you ever bring him in your games? And if so, how does he perform? And I would love to know what you think of his brand new model coming with Warhammer Plus, because I think that looks amazing. Are you going to be picking it up and painting it, even if you won't be bringing him in your games? And I would also love to know how you would change the Vindicare to make him more worthwhile on the tabletop. So let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I will catch you later, guys.